There is someone in your life right now, maybe a coworker, a neighbor, maybe someone you've never even had a real conversation with, who quietly, consistently works against you. And the part that keeps you up at night isn't the hatred itself. It's the word why, because you didn't do anything. You were never given a reason. And that absence of reason is exactly what makes it feel so personal, so confusing, so impossible to shake. Here's what nobody tells you. The hatred was never actually about you. It was always about them. And once you understand the specific behaviors that drive people like this, you'll stop trying to fix something that was never broken. And you'll start seeing these people for exactly what they are. There is a psychological mechanism so deeply embedded in human behavior that most people never recognize it when it's happening to them. It operates quietly beneath the surface of everyday interactions, and it is responsible for more unexplained hatred, more unprovoked hostility, and more social sabotage than almost any other force in human relationships. It's called projection, and the people who hate you for no reason have mastered it. Not intentionally, not consciously, but automatically. The way a drowning person grabs at anything within reach without thinking about what they're doing. Projection at its core is the act of taking everything you cannot accept about yourself and placing it onto someone else. It is the mind's way of protecting the ego from truths it finds unbearable. When a person carries deep shame about their own lack of ambition, they don't look inward. Looking inward is painful. Looking inward requires courage, accountability, and a willingness to sit with discomfort that most people have never been trained to handle. So instead of looking inward, they look outward. And whoever is standing in their line of sight, and whoever represents the thing they secretly wish they were, it becomes the target. You have to understand something about the psychology of these individuals. They are not hateful people in the way we traditionally picture hateful people. They don't wake up in the morning with a plan. They don't sit down and consciously decide to resent you. What happens is far more subtle and far more dangerous than that. They see something in you. Your drive, your discipline, your refusal to stay small, and something inside them reacts. Not with admiration, not even with simple jealousy, with a deep, almost physical discomfort. Because your existence, your progress, your very presence in the room holds up a mirror to everything they have avoided confronting about themselves. And mirrors are uncomfortable when you don't like what you see. So the mind does what it always does when it encounters unbearable truth. It distorts it. It reframes the narrative. Suddenly, you're not driven, you're arrogant, you're not disciplined, you're obsessive, you're not successful, you're lucky or dishonest or the beneficiary of circumstances that have nothing to do with your effort. The projection transforms their internal failure into your external flaw. And once that transformation is complete, the hatred feels completely justified to them. They are not in their own mind acting out of envy or insecurity. They genuinely believe they have identified something wrong with you. This is what makes it so disorienting to be on the receiving end. You look at the situation and you see no cause. You search your memory for the moment you wronged them and you find nothing. You replay conversations, you analyze your behavior, you wonder what you said or did or failed to do. Because the human brain is wired to search for patterns, for reasons, for a logic that makes the world feel navigable. But you will never find the reason you're looking for, because the reason lives inside them, not inside anything you did. The most dangerous version of this behavior appears in people who are highly intelligent and socially skilled, because they don't project clumsily. They project with precision. They take their insecurities and they dress them up in language that sounds reasonable, even righteous. They frame their attacks as concern. They disguise their resentment as observation. They position their hostility as honesty. The kind of brutal, uncomfortable honesty that only someone who truly cares about you would be willing to offer. And because it sounds reasonable, because it is delivered with confidence and dressed in the vocabulary of genuine feedback, people around you begin to believe it. Most people assume that hatred comes with indifference, that someone who dislikes you simply looks away, removes themselves, stops paying attention. It feels logical. It feels like what a person with no interest in you would naturally do. But the reality of how people who hate you actually behave is almost the opposite of that assumption. And once you see it clearly, once you understand the mechanics of what is driving it, you will never be confused by it again. The person who hates you for no reason is watching you, consistently, quietly, and with a level of attention that would make your closest friend seem distracted by comparison. They know when you posted. They noticed when you went silent. They track the new opportunity you mentioned casually 3 months ago, and they are waiting with more patience than they apply to anything else in their own life to see whether it works out or falls apart. They are cataloging your movements, your progress, your associations, and your setbacks with a dedication that borders on obsessive. And they are doing all of this while maintaining the appearance of someone who barely thinks about you at all. This is not accidental behavior. It is driven by something specific and deeply psychological. When a person has anchored their sense of self-worth to comparison, they cannot afford to stop watching. Your life becomes a measuring stick against which they are constantly, compulsively evaluating their own. Every win you experience registers as a loss for them. Every setback you encounter registers as a correction, a restoration of a balance they feel the world owes them. They are not watching out of curiosity. They are watching because your story is directly connected in their mind to the story they are telling themselves about their own worth. What makes this behavior particularly striking is the energy it requires. Monitoring someone's life from a distance across social media through mutual connections, through carefully positioned questions dropped into conversations with people who know you. This takes effort, real, sustained, deliberate effort. And these are often the same individuals who will tell anyone who listens that they are too busy, too focused on their own path, too unbothered to concern themselves with what other people are doing. The contradiction is staggering when you hold both realities at once. A person cannot be simultaneously unbothered and this precisely informed about the details of your life. Pay attention to how much they know. That is always the tell. When someone who claims to have no particular interest in you surfaces in a conversation with accurate, specific, current information about your life, information you never gave them directly, you are not dealing with coincidence. You are dealing with someone who has been paying close attention for a very long time. The details they hold, the timeline they can reconstruct, the accuracy with which they can describe your recent movements. None of that happens passively. It happens through sustained, intentional observation. There is another layer to this that most people miss entirely. The monitoring is not only about gathering information. It is also about maintaining a psychological connection that the hater will never openly admit to having. On some level, they need you in their mental landscape. Removing you from it would mean confronting the emptiness that exists in the space you currently occupy, the space that belongs to ambition they never pursued, risks they never took, and a version of themselves they quietly abandoned somewhere along the way. This is why distance and silence are so profoundly unsettling to people like this. When you stop being visible, when you pull back from the spaces where they monitor you, something in them becomes destabilized. The measuring stick disappears, and without something external to measure themselves against, they are left alone with the one comparison they have spent their entire life trying to avoid. There is a particular kind of power that most people never think to use. It requires no confrontation, no carefully constructed argument, no perfectly timed response. It asks nothing of your energy, nothing of your emotional bandwidth, and nothing of your time. It is simply the act of becoming unreachable. Not physically, not socially, but psychologically. The act of removing yourself so completely from someone's ability to affect you that your absence becomes louder than any response you could have ever given. And for the person who has built their entire relationship with you around reaction, around provocation, around the quiet satisfaction of knowing they can move something inside you, that absence is devastating. Understand what silence actually communicates to someone who hates you. It does not communicate weakness. It does not communicate that they have won, that you are broken, that their assessment of you was accurate. What silence communicates at a level far deeper than words ever could is that they do not matter enough to respond to. And for a person whose entire psychological operation depends on significance, on being seen, being felt, being acknowledged as a force in your life, yet that message is not just uncomfortable, it is unbearable. The people who hate you for no reason have built an invisible contract with you inside their own minds. The terms of that contract are simple. They provoke, you react, they undermine, you defend, they whisper, you explain. Every time you engage, every time you justify yourself, every time you feel the pull to correct the narrative they are spreading or address the subtle hostility they are broadcasting in your direction, you are signing that contract. You are confirming, without realizing it, that they hold a position of relevance in your world, and relevance is the one currency these individuals cannot live without. What most people do not realize is that the provocations, the hostility, the quiet campaigns of undermining, none of it is actually about winning an argument or establishing a fact. It is about generating a response. The response itself is the goal. It does not particularly matter whether your response is anger, sadness, confusion, or defense. Any emotional reaction confirms the same thing, that they reached you, that behind whatever composure you present to the world, there's a place inside you that they can access. And as long as they believe that place exists, they will keep trying to find it. Indifference operates on an entirely different level than silence alone. Silence can sometimes be interpreted as suppressed emotion, as a person who is visibly holding something back, white-knuckling their way through a response they are choosing not to give. True indifference is something else entirely. It is the condition of someone who has genuinely recalibrated their internal landscape to the point where the other person's existence barely registers. It is not performed. It cannot be faked convincingly over time. And when a person who has dedicated significant mental energy to affecting you encounters genuine indifference, something in them short circuits because they have a story about you. They have constructed a detailed internal narrative in which you are affected by them, in which their opinion carries weight in your world, in which their presence, even their distant hostile monitoring presence, occupies meaningful real estate in your mind. Genuine indifference dismantles that narrative completely. It does not argue with the story. It does not present counter-evidence. It simply renders the story irrelevant by demonstrating, through consistent and authentic disengagement, that the storyteller has no audience. This is why the most psychologically sophisticated response to someone who hates you without reason is never the cleverest comeback, never the most elegant public correction, never the most thoroughly documented defense of your character. Those responses, however satisfying they feel in the moment, feed the exact dynamic that keeps the hatred alive and keeps you tethered to someone who was never worth your attention in the first place. There is a form of envy so sophisticated, so carefully packaged, and so socially acceptable that most people not only fail to recognize it when it is directed at them, they actually thank the person delivering it. It does not arrive wearing the face of jealousy. It does not announce itself with bitterness or hostility, or any of the emotions we have been taught to associate with someone who wants what you have. Instead, it arrives dressed in the language of concern, of honesty, of the kind of uncomfortable truth that only a person with genuine insight and genuine care would be willing to say out loud. It sounds like feedback. It sounds like wisdom. And that is precisely what makes it so effective and so difficult to defend yourself against. When a person cannot bring themselves to acknowledge, even privately, that what they feel toward you is envy, the mind performs a remarkable act of transformation. It takes the raw, uncomfortable feeling, the sting of watching someone else move forward while you feel stuck, the quiet rage of seeing someone rewarded for the exact qualities you told yourself didn't matter, and it reframes it entirely. The envy does not disappear. It simply changes its costume. It becomes concern about your methods. It becomes skepticism about your motivations. It becomes a carefully articulated critique of your choices, your character, your direction, delivered with the calm confidence of someone who has thought deeply about your situation and arrived reluctantly at an honest conclusion. What you need to understand about this behavior is the internal logic that drives it. For a person who has built their self-image around being perceptive, being principled, being someone with standards and discernment, the admission of envy is psychologically catastrophic. Envy feels small. Envy feels petty. Envy is the emotion of someone who has measured themselves against another person and come up short, and that admission is incompatible with the identity they have constructed for themselves. So, the transformation from envy to criticism is not a cynical, calculated manipulation in most cases. It is a genuine act of self-preservation. The mind rewrites the emotion in real time, and by the time the words leave their mouth, they believe completely in what they are saying. This is what gives the disguised critique its peculiar texture. It lands differently than ordinary criticism because it carries the full emotional weight of something the speaker believes to be true. There is no hesitation, no tell, no micro-expression of guilt or discomfort that would signal insincerity. They are not lying to you. They are lying to themselves first, and doing it so completely that the deception becomes invisible even under close examination. You walk away from the conversation feeling vaguely unsettled, unable to identify exactly what disturbed you, because the delivery was too composed, too reasonable, too apparently generous in its intention to be dismissed as simple hostility. The moral superiority component is what transforms this from a personal defense mechanism into a social weapon. Because criticism, unlike envy, grants the critic a position of elevation. To criticize someone is to imply that you occupy a vantage point above them, that you can see their situation more clearly than they can, that your judgment is more reliable than their own self-assessment, that your perspective carries an authority that earns it the right to evaluate and correct. Envy places you below the person you resent. Criticism places you above them. And for someone whose entire psychological discomfort is rooted in feeling beneath you, that inversion is not just satisfying, it is necessary. Watch for the specific patterns that reveal the disguise. Genuine criticism is proportionate, specific, and offered with some investment in the outcome. It targets a behavior or a decision, not a pattern of identity. It leaves room for your perspective and does not require your agreement to feel complete. Disguised envy dressed as criticism behaves differently. It tends to be disproportionate in its intensity relative to the actual stakes involved. It gravitates toward your strengths rather than your genuine weaknesses, because it is your strengths, not your weaknesses, that triggered the envy in the first place. It is strangely consistent, surfacing reliably whenever you experience visible progress, and it carries beneath its reasonable surface a subtle but unmistakable investment in your doubt. There is a pattern so consistent, so mathematically reliable in its repetition, that once you recognize it, you will never be able to unsee it. It does not matter what environment you are in, what industry you operate within, what social circle surrounds you, or what form the hostility takes. The pattern remains constant across all of it. The moment you grow, the moment something in your life visibly improves, expands, or elevates, the people who have been quietly hostile toward you do not soften. They do not recalibrate. They do not look at your progress and feel the natural human response of someone witnessing effort being rewarded. Instead, something in them tightens. The hostility sharpens. The monitoring intensifies. The criticism becomes more frequent, more targeted, and delivered with an urgency that was not present before. Your growth does not neutralize their hatred, it accelerates it. To understand why this happens, you have to understand what your stagnation meant to them. On some level, consciously or not, the people who resent you have built a psychological equilibrium around the gap between where you are and where they are. As long as that gap remains manageable, as long as you are close enough to their position that the comparison does not feel too threatening, a certain stability exists in their internal world. They can maintain the narrative. They can tell themselves that the difference between your life and theirs is circumstantial, temporary, or the product of factors that have nothing to do with the choices they have made or avoided making. The story holds together as long as the distance between you remains small enough to explain away. But when you level up, that distance changes, and a change in distance is a change in the story. Suddenly, the the gap is harder to attribute to luck. Suddenly, the explanation of circumstance becomes more difficult to sustain. Suddenly, the comfortable narrative that has been insulating them from a more painful self-examination begins to develop cracks. And those cracks let in a light they have spent considerable energy trying to avoid. Your progress does not just represent your progress. Inside their psychological framework, it represents evidence. Evidence that the life they currently have is at least in part a product of decisions they made and continue to make every single day. This is why the timing of the hatred's intensification is so precise and so telling. It is not random. It does not spike during your difficult periods, during your